There was no sudden crash, no dramatic confrontation. It wasn't like in the movies where everything explodes in one wild, fiery scene. Instead, it was slow, gradual, the kind of change you don't notice at first, but when you do, it feels like the walls are closing in around you. I woke up one morning to silence. It wasn't the usual quiet, like the peaceful, sleepy kind where you can just stretch out and take in the world. No, this silence felt off. It felt heavy, the kind that hangs in the air like a storm cloud you can't escape. I stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out what was different. What had shifted overnight? Nothing specific, yet everything had changed. My wife, Grace, hadn't spoken to me properly in days. Not really. Oh, she would pass through the house in her usual whirlwind, cleaning, organizing, making herself busy, but when our eyes met, there was nothing there. No spark, no recognition. Just nothing. It had been building for weeks, maybe even months, but I hadn't been paying attention. I thought I was being patient. I thought I was being understanding. But this morning, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The space between us had become a chasm, and I wasn't sure if it was even possible to bridge it. Grace was the kind of person who could light up a room, or so I thought. She was full of energy, laughter, that infectious enthusiasm that made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world when she spoke to them. But lately, she was a ghost in our own home. It wasn't like her to retreat into herself, but she had. Little by little, she'd pulled away. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I just waited long enough, things would go back to normal. But the truth was, I had been waiting for too long. And now, sitting there in the dim light of our bedroom, I knew it was time. The realization hit me like a punch in the stomach. I was living with a stranger. I tried to reach out to her, of course. I tried everything. I left her notes, bought her flowers, planned a weekend getaway to try to reignite whatever had been lost. But nothing worked. Every time I made an effort, it was like I was pushing against a wall. No matter how hard I tried, she wouldn't respond. And the few times she did, it felt rehearsed, like she was doing it out of obligation, not love. That morning, the silence between us had reached its peak. She was in the kitchen, like she always was at that time. The sound of her moving around was the only noise in the house. No good morning, or how did you sleep? Just the clink of dishes, the hum of the coffee maker. She didn't even look at me when I walked into the room. Not a single glance, not even a smile. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just a phase. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a few kind words or a romantic gesture. Something had broken between us, and I didn't know if I was the one who could fix it anymore. But more importantly, I wasn't sure if she wanted me to fix it. I stood there for a moment, watching her pour coffee into her cup, her back turned to me. It was as if I wasn't even there. I could feel the weight of it in my chest, the realization that this was it. This was the point of no return. I had loved her for so long, and I thought she had loved me back. But now, looking at the woman who used to be my partner, my confidant, the person I couldn't imagine life without, I didn't know who she was anymore. I thought of the years we'd spent together, the trips, the quiet nights, the stupid little inside jokes that no one else would get. All of it felt like a dream now, a dream I had woken up from. And in that instant, I realized that I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I didn't ask her if she wanted to talk. I didn't beg her to explain herself. Instead, I turned around and walked out of the kitchen. I went into the other room, grabbed my bag, and started packing. I didn't even look back. This wasn't the ending I had imagined, but it was the one I had been avoiding for too long. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I didn't know where I'd go or what I'd do. But one thing was clear, I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. As I walked out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something irreversible had happened. But the strangest part? I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. Free from the weight of the silence. Free from the lies I had been telling myself. I was done waiting for someone who didn't want me anymore. And I knew, in that moment, that I had to leave. The house was too quiet now. The kind of silence that makes your skin itch, like it's pressing against you from all sides. I thought I'd be able to hold it together, but when I stood there, halfway out the door, I realized I had no idea where to go. No plan. No idea what to do with myself. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. I was lost. Marlowe had always been the one with the answers. She was the one who could speak and make everything sound simple, make everything feel okay. But now, it was like she had disappeared. Slowly, piece by piece, and I hadn't even noticed it happening. What happened to the woman I married? The one who had dreams, who could talk about anything for hours, who had that infectious laugh that I couldn't get enough of. The person I had fallen in love with felt like a stranger now. I remember when we first moved in together, how she used to say, "We'll make this our home. A place where we build memories." We painted the walls together, picked out furniture, made it a space that reflected both of us. But now, it felt like I was living in someone else's home. Her presence was still there, but the warmth, the connection, gone. I grabbed my coat from the chair by the door, my fingers numb as I fumbled to put it on. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I couldn't just walk out without understanding why this was happening. I needed to know what had gone wrong. So, I turned around. The kitchen still smelled like coffee, but there was no warmth left in the air. I took a deep breath and walked back toward the living room where Marlowe sat on the couch, her eyes glued to her phone. "Marlowe," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She didn't look up. She never looked up. "We need to talk." She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge my presence. A few months ago, she would have dropped everything to listen, to give me her attention. But now she just scrolled. Scrolled like I wasn't even there. It hit me then. She had already checked out. I wasn't even worth a simple conversation anymore. I felt my stomach twist, but I kept my voice steady. "Are we done?" I asked, barely believing the words as they left my lips. It felt like a cruel question, but it was the only one that seemed to matter now. "Are you done with me?" Her fingers paused on the screen of her phone, but she didn't look up. There was a long silence. She exhaled sharply, then finally spoke, her voice empty, almost distant. "I don't know, Cedric. I really don't." Those words felt like a slap to the face. I had spent so long pretending that everything was okay, convinced that if I was patient enough, if I just held on a little longer, things would turn around. But hearing her say that, hearing her admit that she didn't even know anymore, was a punch to the gut. I wanted to say something, to argue, to make her see how much this was killing me. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen in place, watching the woman I loved slip further away with every second that passed. I didn't have the strength to fight anymore. Something inside me had shattered, and the worst part was that I didn't even know if I cared to fix it. How could I, when she had already let go? I walked away from her, back toward the door. My hand hovered on the doorknob, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I should just leave. No explanation. Just go. But I couldn't. I wasn't ready to face the truth of what was happening. Not yet. And so, I stood there, stuck in this endless loop of confusion and uncertainty. The worst part? I didn't know if I was more afraid of losing her, or if I was more afraid of finally realizing she had already slipped away. I stood there, hand still resting on the doorknob, unsure of what to do next. There was no real plan anymore, no roadmap for what came after. Everything felt surreal, like I was trapped in a dream I couldn't wake up from. I wanted to walk away, wanted to leave this feeling behind and never look back. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the desperate need for closure. Marlowe was still on the couch, her gaze glued to her phone as though I wasn't even in the room. I could hear the sound of her scrolling, the quiet buzz of notifications popping up one after another. It was like she was in another world, and I was just an accessory to it. She was physically here, but emotionally, she might as well have been 1,000 miles away. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to ask. I had to understand what had happened, what had changed between us. Is there someone else? I heard the words escape my lips before I even had a chance to stop them. The question lingered in the air, thick with tension. Marlowe didn't look up, didn't flinch. For a moment, I thought maybe I hadn't even asked the question loud enough for her to hear. But then she finally spoke. "No, there's no one else, Cedric." Her voice was cold, flat. It felt rehearsed, as though she had said those same words 100 times before, maybe to herself. Maybe she was trying to convince herself of it. I stared at her, trying to read her expression, trying to find some flicker of emotion in her eyes. But there was nothing, just emptiness. It was like talking to a wall. I felt the anger rising inside me. Anger at myself for not seeing this sooner, for not asking these questions earlier. But mostly, I was angry at her for making me feel invisible. She had been the light of my life, the one person I thought I could always count on, and now she was just a ghost. I wanted to shout at her, to demand she feel something, anything. But instead, I just stood there, too exhausted to fight anymore. Then what is this, Marlowe? What happened to us? What changed? For the first time in what felt like forever, she finally looked at me. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and humor, were now distant. I don't know, Cedric. I don't know when it happened, but I've changed. I've changed, and I don't think I can go back to how things were. I swallowed hard, the words piercing through me like a knife. I didn't know how to respond. What do you say to that? How do you fix something when the person you loved admits they don't even recognize themselves anymore? I stood there for a long time, just staring at her, trying to make sense of everything. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized that there was nothing left to say. We were both drowning in this silence, and neither of us knew how to pull the other out. Finally, I turned away, walking toward the door. I didn't know what I was hoping for, some kind of last-minute apology, maybe, or a sign that she still cared. But there was nothing, just silence. And as I stepped outside, the cool air hit me like a slap in the face. I was alone, and the worst part? I had no idea what to do with it. I didn't go far. I stepped outside into the cool evening air, the door clicking shut behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to walk away. Something kept me rooted to the spot, my feet barely moving on the cracked sidewalk outside our house. There was a part of me that wanted to leave, to just keep walking until I couldn't hear her voice anymore. But another part of me, maybe the part that had been holding on for too long, wanted answers. The silence had become unbearable, and no matter how much it hurt, I needed something more than the empty words we had exchanged. I needed the truth. So I stood there for a while, just breathing in the night air. My thoughts were racing, but I couldn't make sense of them. Should I just accept what was happening? Let go of this life we had built together? Or should I confront her one last time and find out if there was even a chance for us? The decision weighed heavily on me, but in the end, there was only one thing I knew for sure. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I walked back to the door and turned the handle, opening it quietly. Inside, everything was as it had been when I left, except this time. The air felt colder, somehow. Marlowe was still sitting on the couch, but her phone was discarded beside her, and her eyes were focused on the floor. I could see her shoulders rise and fall with each breath, but she didn't say anything. I stood there for a moment, just watching her. The woman who had once been my best friend, my partner, my love, now a stranger sitting in the same space, but a million miles away. It was like we were both trapped in a room with no exits, too afraid to face the truth, but too exhausted to keep pretending we were okay. I couldn't stand it anymore. "Marlowe," I said, my voice shaking just a little. "Please, talk to me. I'm not going to walk out again until we really talk about this. What happened to us?" She didn't look up at first, but after a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, Cedric. I really don't. Somewhere along the way, I just stopped feeling like myself." She hesitated, her fingers playing with the edge of her sleeve as she tried to find the right words. "You used to be everything to me. But now, when I look at you, I don't recognize what we have anymore." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I could hear the honesty in her voice, but it hurt so much I almost couldn't process it. "I didn't change, Marlowe. I've been here, waiting. But you pulled away from me, piece by piece. You stopped talking to me. You stopped being the person I fell in love with." She flinched at my words, but there was no defense in her eyes. She didn't try to argue. Instead, she just stared at her hands, her voice trembling as she continued. "I never meant for it to happen. I didn't want it to happen. But somewhere along the line, I just started feeling nothing. I don't know how to explain it. It's like I've been living in this fog, and I didn't even realize how deep it had gotten until it was too late." I could feel my chest tighten as the weight of her words settled over me. It wasn't some trivial issue. It wasn't something I could just fix with a few sweet words or gestures. She had been losing herself, slipping away, and I hadn't been able to stop it. Worse still, I had been so caught up in my own denial that I had ignored the signs. I didn't know what to say, but I had to ask, "Is there still a chance for us, Marlowe? Or are we already gone?" She didn't answer right away. It felt like an eternity passed before she finally lifted her gaze to mine, her eyes glassy but resigned. "I don't know, Cedric. I wish I could tell you there's still hope, but I don't know if I can give you that. Not anymore." I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. Her words were final, but they also seemed like an admission of something she had already accepted. Maybe I should have expected it. After everything, I should have known better. But hearing her say it out loud, hearing her confirm what I had already suspected, was like a crushing weight I couldn't escape. I took a step back, my head spinning, and for the first time, I felt the full force of what was happening. There was no going back. We were both too far gone. The love we had was no longer enough to save us from the distance that had grown between us. I could feel the tears threatening, but I swallowed them down. I wasn't going to cry in front of her. Not now. Not when I still had some semblance of pride left. I think it's time I go, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I think we both need some space to figure things out. To figure out who we are without each other. She nodded silently, her eyes never leaving mine. It was as if she had already made peace with this moment, even if I hadn't. There were no words left to say, no promises to make. Just the weight of reality pressing down on both of us. As I turned to walk away, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't relief. It wasn't closure. It was just empty. I didn't know what came next, but at least I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living in a world where silence was louder than love. The door clicked shut behind me, and I stepped outside into the cool night. My breath was shaky, my heart thudding in my chest as I tried to process what had just happened. I had always been the type to keep things inside, to bottle up my emotions and hope that time would fix everything. But time hadn't fixed this. No, time had made everything worse. I stood on the porch for what felt like hours, just staring out into the darkness, unsure of where to go or what to do next. I had thought I was ready for this, ready for the confrontation, ready for the truth. But now that it was here, it felt like my world had come undone. How had we gotten here? How had we gone from being inseparable to being two people who couldn't even look at each other? I thought of all the small moments, the little things I had ignored. The way Marlowe had pulled away from me so subtly at first, like a thread unraveling from a sweater, so small I barely noticed it. But now, standing here in the cold, I couldn't ignore it anymore. She had changed. And God, so had I. I took a deep breath, but it didn't help. My mind was racing, images of her distant eyes, her hollow voice, playing on a loop. I didn't know if I could keep going like this, holding on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. I didn't know if I could even stay in this town any longer. But then, I remembered something she said. She had stopped feeling like herself. That hit me harder than anything, because I didn't know who I was anymore either. Who was I in a marriage where silence spoke louder than words? Who was I when the love I had been holding on to felt more like a distant memory than a living, breathing thing? I needed space. I needed to figure out who I was without her, without this relationship. I couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep hoping that things would magically get better. So, I did the only thing that felt right in that moment. I walked away. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not in that house. Not in that life. I found myself in the park a few blocks away, sitting on a bench under a streetlight, my mind still spinning. The air was colder now, and I pulled my coat tighter around me, trying to shield myself from the chill that had settled deep within. There was a dull ache in my chest, but it wasn't just from the heartbreak. It was from the realization that I didn't know what came next. I hadn't been prepared for this, for the emptiness, for the confusion. But what was I supposed to do? Stay in a relationship that was already over? Keep fighting for something that had already slipped through my fingers? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to clear my mind. I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay in this limbo, caught between holding on and letting go. But as I sat there in the cold, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay where I was anymore. The cold air bit at my skin, and I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I had no destination in mind, no clear plan. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. Not yet, anyway. I needed time. But more than that, I needed to breathe without the suffocating presence of everything that had fallen apart. I kept walking, my footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The city was quieter than usual, like it was holding its breath too, waiting for something to change. The usual hum of traffic, the late-night chatter of neighbors, it was all distant now. Everything felt far away, almost surreal. I stopped at a small diner, the neon sign flickering weakly in the night. The warmth that hit me as I stepped inside was a welcome relief, though it didn't do much to soothe the chaos swirling inside my head. I slid into a booth in the corner, hoping for a moment of peace, even if just for a few minutes. The waitress came over with a tired smile, her eyes briefly meeting mine before she took my order without a word. I was used to the silence now. At home, at least there was always background noise, TV, music, the buzz of life. But now it was just me. The silence in my mind had turned into a roar, louder than anything around me. I didn't know how long I sat there, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly, until I realized I was trying to keep my hands busy, anything to stop them from shaking. The reflection in the window beside me was a stranger. I looked different, haggard, weary. I barely recognized myself, let alone the man I had been just months ago. Where was that man who believed in love, in commitment, in fighting for something worth having? Where was that certainty? I ran my fingers through my hair, sighing. I didn't have the answers. I wasn't sure I ever would. What I knew, however, was that I couldn't go back to that house. Not now. Maybe not ever. I had no idea what the future held, but I couldn't keep pretending that everything would be okay when it clearly wasn't. I thought of Marlowe, of the way her face had looked when she admitted she didn't know who she was anymore. That haunted me. I wanted to believe she was just going through something, that it wasn't really the end. But she hadn't cried. She hadn't fought for me. She hadn't even tried to stop me. That was the hardest part. I would have done anything to have her fight for us, but she didn't. She just let me go. I couldn't decide if that hurt more than anything else. The quiet acceptance that maybe we were both too far gone to fix, too far apart to even try. Maybe we had both changed so much that there was no going back. I finished my coffee, the bitter taste lingering on my tongue, but it didn't help clear my head. In fact, it only made it worse. I was drowning in confusion, stuck between what I wanted and what was real. I couldn't deny that something inside me was breaking, but the question was whether or not I had the strength to rebuild it. I stood up from the booth, my legs stiff from sitting too long. I still had no idea what to do, where to go, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay here, trapped in the memory of a life that was no longer mine. As I stepped back into the night, I took a deep breath, trying to find some clarity. It wasn't there yet, but I knew I'd have to keep walking, keep searching for the answers. Because if I didn't, I would stay stuck in this feeling forever, and that wasn't an option anymore. The streets were empty as I walked, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement. It was like the whole world had gone quiet, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation I'd just had with Marlowe, how she'd said she didn't recognize herself anymore. The words were like a punch to the gut every time they replayed in my mind. I didn't know what I had been expecting when I walked away. Maybe a change, maybe some dramatic moment where everything would click back into place, and we'd fix it all. But life didn't work that way. There was no clean resolution, no perfect fix. What was left between us now felt broken, scattered like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. I thought about what she'd said, about not feeling like herself, and for the first time, I wondered if I had lost myself too. Had I become someone I didn't recognize? Was I just holding on because I was too afraid to admit that this was it? That we were done? It was hard to admit, but I was scared. Not just of losing her, but of losing myself in the process. I had been so focused on trying to save something that might have already been lost. I had been so sure that love could fix everything. But maybe love wasn't enough when the people involved had stopped trying. I found myself at the edge of a park, the bright moon hanging low in the sky. It was almost peaceful here, a stark contrast to the storm inside me. I sat on a bench and stared at the empty path in front of me. The wind rustled the leaves, a soft, whispering sound that seemed to echo in the quiet night. Everything felt distant now, as though I were watching my life unfold from a distance, unable to reach it. The more I thought about Marlowe, the more I realized something I hadn't been willing to admit before. This wasn't just about her. This was about me, too. About who I had become and who I wanted to be. I had stayed in a relationship because it was easy, because I thought it was supposed to work, but I hadn't asked myself if it was what I truly needed. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the thoughts that had been circling in my mind. But they wouldn't leave. They were persistent, digging deeper, forcing me to confront the truth I had been avoiding. The truth that maybe, just maybe, I had been holding on to someone who had already let go. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the cool air biting at my skin. It felt good to be outside, away from the suffocating atmosphere of the house, away from the weight of her absence. But even in the open, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was missing. I wasn't just missing her. I was missing the version of myself that existed before all of this. The version that believed in easy answers and happy endings. I stood up, the bench creaking beneath me, and began walking again. I had no destination in mind, no plan, but the act of moving, of putting one foot in front of the other, was the only thing that made sense. Maybe the answers would come in time. Maybe they wouldn't. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was actually moving forward, even if I didn't know where I was headed. I couldn't fix what was broken. I couldn't go back and undo the mistakes. But I could keep moving, one step at a time, towards something that felt like hope, whatever that looked like. The city around me was still, but somehow, I felt like I was finally starting to move. Each step I took, no matter how small, felt like a release, a step away from the weight of everything that had been suffocating me. The truth was, I had been holding on to a life that no longer existed. But that didn't mean I couldn't build a new one, even if I didn't have all the answers yet. As I walked through the park, the cool night air felt refreshing. For the first time in what felt like months, I could breathe deeply without the pressure of constant anxiety pressing down on me. I had no idea what the future would bring, but in that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't alone. Not really. I had myself, and that was more than enough to start over. The hardest part wasn't the silence that followed the conversation with Marlowe, nor was it the emptiness I had felt walking out of that house. The hardest part was confronting the fact that sometimes relationships end, not because we fail, but because we grow in different directions. And that was okay. It didn't mean I wasn't worthy of love. It didn't mean I was broken. It simply meant that it was time for me to take the reins of my own life again, to live for myself first. I woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity I hadn't had in a long time. I wasn't sure where I was going next, but I knew it wouldn't be in the same direction I had been going before. I made a decision. I would find my own happiness. I would learn to be content on my own terms. And somewhere along that journey, maybe I'd find love again. But for now, I was enough. I went out that day, rediscovered things I loved that I'd forgotten about. A quiet walk in the park, a good cup of coffee at a local cafe, and even reading books I hadn't touched in years. It wasn't dramatic or life-changing, but it was mine. It was the start of something new. Something that didn't have to be perfect, but something that was real. As I made my way through the day, I realized I was no longer living in the shadow of the past. I was living for the present, and maybe, just maybe, for the future that I was beginning to see, not as a source of fear, but as a place full of possibilities. I may not have all the answers yet, and I still carried some of the pain from the end of my marriage, but I was learning to let go. Life was bigger than the narrow path I had been walking, and I was ready to find the courage to walk down a new road, one that would lead me to the life I was meant to live. And in the end, that was all I really needed to know. Everything else would fall into place.